Well, hello. My name is Rebecca Eigen, and I am an astrologer for the seventh house from Houston, Texas, with light. And tonight I'm going to talk about love at first sight and what can that possibly mean for all of us when this deliriously happy situation happens to us. Um, in the book Ion, which is a really awesome book that I highly recommend, he describes the process of individuation, which we are all on, whether we know it or not. So, the first chapter in the book is about ego development and its development out of the maternal unconscious. And then the next chapter in the book is about the shadow, which is the first step into our own unconscious. And unless we can experience retrieving our shadow, we will never get to the masculine and feminine contrasexual images in all our psyches, in our unconscious, which he called the anima and animus. So I'm going to talk about that a lot tonight. Therefore, the only way we can learn about ourselves is through the mirrors that people hold up for us. And so being in relationship or getting into a relationship is essential for self-awareness. We can't learn about ourselves if we don't learn about these unconscious parts of ourselves, and the only way that's going to happen is through the mirrors of other people. When I first learned about all this, I was like, this is amazing. Everybody should know about it. Because think about it, when you're 40, you get to a point where you realize this kind of relationship has happened to me before. What is this about? Because I'm the common denominator here. So when we're falling in love, we're actually putting an unconscious part of our soul, our inner beloved, onto the other person. And that person is going to carry it for us for a time. But if anybody has ever been married or in and out of relationships, we all know that eventually the feeling of being in love is going to go away as projections will have fallen off that person. Because initially, our relationships begin with projection and transference. And projection, as you all know, is seeing something outside of us in the other person that we don't know about that's about ourselves. And transference is transferring our history of our parents to that person. And all of this happens unconsciously. So, in our relationships, what we're really striving for is learning about our inner beloved, our inner male and female, that he called the anima and animus. Although not very many people are aware that this is what is happening when they are intensely fascinated by another person. And this is what the ancients called the mystical marriage or sacred marriage. And Carl Jung called it the connucho. I don't have that book with me, or I'd hold it up to show it to you all. He called it the connucho, which is the conjunction of our inner male and female. So these images are so deep within us, and they're going to begin with our first experiences of masculinity and femininity. These are principles. This is not about gender. So a woman carries an image of her male counterpart made up largely of her history with her father, her brothers, and all the males that are in her life at the beginning of her life. So any early experiences with men. And this inner masculine, the animus, helps her to achieve her goals, gives her clarity of thought, intellectual clarity, helps her have clearer boundaries, and becomes a mediator between her ego and her unconscious. As inner and outer create a mirroring effect, she will know a lot about what kind of inner male she has by the outer male that she's relating to. and the person on whom the projections land. Because initially, as I said, there's a projection of our inner male or female onto that person. And according to Jung, a man faces the same dilemma. When a man projects his anima, his perfect God soul image onto a woman, she becomes the carrier of his anima. And his anima is his feminine, his inner feminine, that can help a man get in touch with his capacity to relate, his capacity to be in a relationship and express his feelings, his nurturing skills, and even his ability to create. So his anima acts as a muse to bridge the gap between his inner and outer worlds. She animates him from within. So when this happens to both people at the same time, we call this falling in love. They definitely fall, and they fall into their own unconscious image as each person projects parts of himself or herself onto the other person. Same sex or opposite sex, it doesn't matter if you're gay, straight, hetero, whatever. It happens to everybody because, again, these are principles, masculine and feminine principles. This is not about gender, but it evokes a feeling of fantasy and eros. And it's a strong sexual component to projection when we see somebody who can carry our inner beloved. So when we have that feeling that we are in love, when that kind of compulsiveness towards an individual takes place, it's a real clue that a projection has occurred from our own unconscious contents and has landed on another person. So it always begins that way. It always begins with projecting our own unconscious contents. So projection of the anima, the female in men, and the animus, the male in a woman, is how we learn about ourselves. And self-knowledge is the gift that relating with others will bring us. And when we are so in love with another person and we get separated from these images, we will feel what the primitives called a loss of soul. Because the carrier, the person who's carrying our projection, has our soul. And if the relationship is not maintained or it doesn't work out, we're still looking for ourselves out there and looking for that one person who can complete us. So this is the beginning when we all have rose-colored glasses, and I have a scarf here to show that we are actually looking through a veil of unconsciousness when we look at another person with that kind of fascination. So projection is natural. We all do it. And even if it lands on someone and we marry them, it's limited in time because eventually the projections will fall off. They can't carry our projection forever. So we can't make gods and goddesses out of people. They are ordinary and extraordinary human beings, just like us, with faults and flaws, just like us. And there is no perfect person out there who will magically fulfill our every fantasy. And only a child expects perfection. So relating as a conscious human being and adult, we have to learn to compromise. We have to learn to accept some of the unacceptable in others, and they will have to accept us too. And in that kind of loving acceptance, we will grow. We grow into more of who we came here to be. And they will have parts of us that we are missing that we don't know about. So both people start to really have an opportunity to grow into becoming more of who you came here to be. And consciousness of our opposites is what this is all about. It's like these are opposites inside of us that we aren't aware of. when we have a relationship for a certain period of time and the projections are still on that person, we can feel this is my soulmate. And I hear people saying that all the time. I'm looking for my soulmate. But when we are expecting another human being to carry our unconscious for us, we're putting a huge burden on them. I'm going to read a quote by Robert Johnson that's in my book. This is my book, The Shadow Dance and the Astrological Seventh House Workbook. And Robert says, though no one notices at the time, in loveness obliterates the humanity of the beloved. One does a curious kind of insult to another by falling in love with him, for we are really looking at our own projection of God, not at the other person. If two people are in love, they tread on stardust for a time and live happily ever after. That is, so long as the experience of divinity has obliterated time for them. Only when they come down to earth do they have to look at each other realistically, and only then does the possibility of real mature love exist. So, this would account for our passionate attractions to other people. We have these passionate attractions to other people. Everybody goes through this, and we go through it over and over and over. And if we're in and out of relationships a lot, especially when we're young, the older we get, the less we're attracted to people because we are retrieving parts of ourselves through every relationship that comes into our experience. So looking at relationships in this way gives us a lot more choices. If we can talk about this information with our partner, then we can both make a commitment to help each other go through what I call a shadow dance. Because it begins with our shadow and taking back our projections from each other. And it takes a long period of time. This is not anything anybody is going to do overnight because there's so much to us. I mean, we are like a traveling roadshow people. All of us have a lot of different characteristics and qualities. So when we are willing to do shadow work with another person, we learn about tolerance and compassion for our mistakes and for the mistakes of other people. And if we're the kind of person that can never say we're sorry to our partner, then we have some huge issues that we really need to look at. We learn to say we're sorry because no one is perfect and right all the time. I hear people say to me, and guys have said this to me, and women have said this to me. I can do nothing right. Everything I do is wrong according to my partner, my significant other. So, having a relationship with another person entails dealing with conflicts and going through situations where you're having to become conscious of these inner opposites that are going on inside you. I mean, what if you are trying to communicate and you communicate to your partner that you don't like something and they do it again and then they do it again and they just keep doing it? They are not hearing you and they are not listening to what you're saying. Then that is a very difficult relationship to be in because the truth is we all make mistakes and we all have issues. And the only way to work through conflicts is to meet each other halfway, to look at where we are polarizing. So if we're striving to become conscious and conscious of our total selves, we're going to polarize with people. We're going to polarize where one person's doing one extreme and the other person starts doing another extreme. And that's how we will learn about ourselves. That's how we will learn about our inner opposites that are unconscious. And there's no other way to do this. So just in recognizing that we're polarizing and then stopping each other and saying that, look, we're polarizing here. Because the other kind of love where they are your ideal fantasy, which they will be for a long period of time until you marry each other. But then after you've been married for a while, you'll see that they're not the perfect ideal that you actually projected onto them, which was your own image of your perfect ideal, eventually those things have to fall off. So when we are looking for romantic images, they're going to disappoint us. You know, they're going to disappoint us, and we're going to have issues with each other because they are not perfect, and neither are we. And the curious thing is that we can be repulsed and attracted to the very same person. So when we feel we're in love, when we have a fascination or a compulsion towards an individual, and this, you know, again, this applies whether we're gay, straight, whatever, that's a real clue that we have put our unconscious contents on that person. So write in a journal. What was that about? What did that mean? What does that want from me? There is a teleology in the universe, and teleology just means it's leading somewhere. So these situations are going to repeat in order to bring us to our own wholeness. So when people find fault with each other and there's a crisis, a big crisis in a relationship, that's a huge turning point. It really is. And when we're in this state, which Levi Bruhl called participation mystique, no amount of logical reasoning can talk us out of it. When we are super in love with somebody or when we can't stand somebody, we're actually splitting off parts of ourselves. And I'm going to read to y'all what Ed Edinger calls this. To the extent that the opposites remain unconscious and unseparated, one lives in a state of participation mystique, which means that one identifies with one side of a pair of opposites and projects its contrary as enemy. Space for consciousness to exist appears between the opposites, which means one becomes conscious as one is able to contain and endure the opposites within. Jung says, to put it briefly, it means a state of identity in mutual unconsciousness. So he said that when we're falling in love, we are actually in a state of mutual unconsciousness. Perhaps I should explain this further. If the same unconscious complex is constellated in two people at the same time, it produces a remarkable emotional effect, a projection, which causes either a mutual attraction or a mutual repulsion. I mean, that's what Carl Jung said about this. So becoming conscious with another person is essential, again, to self-awareness. And I don't really think we know anyone until we marry them. When we're together day in and day out, we will see them in a lot of different situations, and they will see us. So now we're having a real relationship as the projections have fallen off, and we will find that sometimes they're the ideal that we projected on them, and sometimes they're not. And they can't. Sometimes they're going to annoy the hell out of us, and we're going to annoy the hell out of them. They'll no longer be able to provide the constant magic that we thought we would have when we married them. You know, when people get married, they have like he said, they have stardust in their eyes. Well, eventually they have to become real. And when we are with them day in and day out, they will become real in our eyes. And conversely, you know, if we never have a relationship with them, then we can go our whole lives thinking that they were Prince Charming or Sleeping Beauty. As myth shows us, these are the romantic stories. This is the part of us that needs to awaken inside of us, not outside in someone else. So mythological motifs are much like characters in our dreams. I mean, have you all experienced where you have all these different images, psychic images in your dreams that come to you? Well, these are also bringing you awareness of your inner male or female. So this too is when, you know, we are all in a state of becoming, and we all have many, many selves. So when we start to take this information seriously, then we are growing. We will be growing and changing, and no one stays the same for very long. And you'll know it's love. You'll know it's love to the degree that you're willing to grow and change with your partner. Love to me is feeling your feelings and sharing them with your partner in the little mundane ways that living day in and day out can provide. It's that kind word when someone's tired, or telling them you've got a lot on your plate, I'll cook tonight. Love is that kind of experience with another person. And in the book, Understanding the Psychology of Romantic Love, Robert Johnson called this stirring the oatmeal kind of love. So it's the kind word when someone is down, the spontaneous touch passing through the kitchen, or offering to help again when the other is burdened by responsibilities. So if you can go through these experiences and recognize that these little mundane experiences are what builds relationship and what builds trust. It's trust is that you're getting to know that person, because I guarantee you did not know each other when you got married. So in understanding that romantic love is not love, that's where we're headed now. Now that we're moving out of the age of Pisces, where everything was this romantic idealism. So it's opening up our hearts and building trust with another human being. And it's only when we feel with our heart that we actually evolve. And the other thing he says is that falling in love, romantic love, is actually kind of narcissistic. We actually are all narcissistic in that regard, because we are seeing a part of ourselves in that other person, and then we expect them to be that. And then eventually we end up with varying amounts of animosity because nobody can live up to a projected image. This is the book, again, that I first started with Ion. And look, this is how I read. I take notes and there's so much in this book. But he says, and I will read one thing he says in here. When the animus and anima meet, the animus draws his sword of power, and the anima ejects her poison of illusion and seduction. But the outcome need not always be negative, since the two are equally likely to fall in love, a special instance of love at first sight. The language of love is of astonishing uniformity, using the well-worn formulas with the utmost devotion and fidelity, so that once again, the two partners find themselves in a banal collective situation. Yet they live in the illusion that they are related to one another in a most individual way. In both its positive and its negative aspects, the anima-animus relationship is always full of animosity. It is emotional and hence collective. So in other words, when we get into fights with each other, and all of a sudden we start saying things to the other, as he said, the male inside of us will start speaking for us and draw his sword. And the female in a man will start leaking out in moodiness and snide remarks, and he will start acting out his anima, which is the feminine inside of him that is perturbed at the situation. So we don't want to let these two images that live inside of us take over and rule our relationships or be in our relationships. We want to relate to them inside of us, which is where they really need to be. And Jung also says both of them are unconscious powers, gods, in fact, as the ancient world quite rightly conceived them to be To call them by this name is to give them that central position in the scale of psychological values, which has always been theirs, whether consciously or unconsciously acknowledged or not. Their power grows in proportion to the degree that they remain unconscious. And those who do not see them are in their hands, just as a typhus epidemic flourishes best when its source is undiscovered. So if we don't see that these people are part of us, then yes, we're going to suffer at their hands because we don't realize we've projected our own unconscious onto them. So another thing that can happen is both people have a nonverbal agreement to keep up their fantasy in order to keep the fantasy alive and their ideal going, that neither of them will tell each other the truth about what they're really thinking or feeling. So to keep the peace, they keep their truths hidden. So now, through using anger, control, sexual withdrawal, and a variety of other manipulations, we try to force that person to be our projected image and live out our fantasy, our imaginary ideal that we put on them, who we thought they were. And they can't. They can't live up to that expectation and then still be true to themselves. So now, when all the projections have fallen off that person, now you have come to a place where you have the goal. The goal has to be that you're faced with the task of establishing a real relationship with another person, with the reality of who they are, not who you thought they were. The us in us that is flawed and suffering, our human self, is also our divine, our divinity, and so is theirs. So our divinity is all of what we are, not just our light, not just the positive dimensions of us, but our shadow and our fears and our failures and all the different things that accumulate inside of us from growing up, from being with our parents. And all of these relationships are basically bringing us issues that we had with our mother and father. I mean, this is surprising to find out that we will have the same issues that our mother and father had with each other, and then with our partners. So Freud says there are 6 people in the bed. There's their mother and father, our mother and father, and then us and our partner. And that's how our relationships are, because so much of us is unconscious. So this is a huge revelation, to really, really get it, that there are parts of all of us that we don't know and that we're looking for ourselves out there. And it's interesting to hear ourselves or even others say, they're not the person I married, or say to each other, you're not the person I thought you were. In James Hollis's book, and his book is called The Eden Project, In Search of the Magical Other, he said, in the beginning, we may have even loved their otherness, but now it drives us nuts and drives us up a wall. And we tell ourselves, well, they must have changed. Well, here's the startling insight. He also says that relinquishing our expectations of rescue by the other person is the most difficult project of our lives. Yes, relinquishing that expectation that they will rescue us. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, that's part of the deal. That is part of our goal. So responsibility for ourselves is actually how we each grow up. Now, I want to conclude, and what I want to say is that if we all know about this, then how can we do it differently? Well, this is where, to me, astrology is so valuable. The 7th house in astrology is called the marriage house. It's also the house of partners, and it's called by the ancients the house of open enemies. Why? Why would our partners have to become our enemies? Our partners will become our enemies to the degree that we are unwilling to see our own opposites that are in our unconscious. And in astrology, the seventh house is an air house. So, air is communication, objectivity, logic, and being in a relationship requires all of that of us. So, air rules communication and relating to others in a committed relationship, because the seventh house is the house of commitments. And I believe we have to make that commitment to the relationship in order to get through the shadow. It's so hard to do this work that we need some kind of container for the relationship so that we will press on through. And even then, probably 50 to 60% of relationships and marriages end in divorce because this is not easy. So I don't believe that it's easy, but it is also so valuable if we're willing to press through it, because then that person is actually a gift for us. That person is bringing us parts of ourselves that we've needed all along, parts of us that we did not know about. And the seventh house is so valuable because whatever planets are there, and planets are archetypes. An archetype is simply a characteristic that is in all of us. We all have all of the archetypes. And astrology is a fabulous tool for recognizing what is in our seventh house that we don't know about, because it's 180 degrees opposite of what we identify with, which is our first house. Our first house is our persona, it's our mask. In astrology, we call that the rising sign. Well, it's what we know, it's our ego consciousness. But we are all so much more than what we know. My teacher, Pittman McGehee, says that we are like a traveling roadshow of people. We are. So any oppositions in the chart and any squares that cause friction in our own character are going to be played out in our relationships. We will actually unconsciously choose a person. We didn't choose them. Our unconscious chose them so that we can see ourselves. And then the sign of Libra is the archetype of Libra is the natural ruler of the seventh house. And Libra is the sign considered to be the one most interested in relating to others. Libra is a cardinal sign and active in social affairs and good at organizing groups of people. It's ruled by the planet Venus and has a flair for art and creativity and a distinct need for beauty, symmetry, and balance. So this need for balance extends into our relating skills. It is also very aware of equality. Because of the balance, it's very aware that things have to stay in balance and keeping things fair with each other. So this is a clue that we all need in order to have a successful relationship. We all have Libra somewhere in our chart, not just the people born with the sun sign of Libra. So that particular house, your particular Venus, which is how you attract and love and what you value in relating to another person, is also going to be influential. So we have to learn to be considerate and reach out when the other needs us and be willing to show that we need them too. Nothing is a one-way street. So any planet in the seventh will have these requirements no matter what sign is there. And everybody's completely different. And Libra is seeking to be objective, because it's 180 degree opposition. It describes two opposite urges in the psyche that will need to stay in proportion to each other. The symbol for Libra is the scales. And so this symbol implies that in partnership, we will be required to consciously create balance with our significant other. Libra's also interested in ideas and concepts because it is an air sign, and it's therefore very mental in its orientation to life. So thinking, reflecting, becoming objective where our partner, our parent, that's a slip of the tongue, where our parent, who is very much like our parents, is concerned, is a very important ingredient. It's very important to think about these things and to write in a journal, to keep track of the different people that have come in and out of your life, and to go into your own unconscious, to look at what might be repeating and where have I needed to do some of that in my life that they're overdoing for me. So astrology is a synchronistic model. Synchronicity means that what's inside shows up outside. And just, I've said this many times before, but it bears repeating. The alchemist had a dictum: as above, so below, as within, so without. And they will show up in our life, and it appears to be a coincidence, but it isn't. It's energy, it's synchronicity. And this energy is that what we are is who we will attract. Yes. So taking back our shadow and our negative projections onto our partner is part of becoming conscious of ourselves. And when you take any planet, I hear people with Mars, the planet of action, it's the male principle. Being direct is what Mars is about. When it's in the seventh, or the ruler of the seventh, these people tell me over and over how violent their ex-husbands were, or how they've constantly attracted aggressive or angry partners. People with the moon there will tell me about how needy their partner is, how clingy and how emotional and how dependent they are. Uranus, when people have Uranus in the seventh, they will say, my partner is so unpredictable, so detached and aloof. With Saturn, they can say how cold, how unresponsive, how limiting and critical that person is. With Jupiter, they may say how opinionated, how inflated, how self-indulgent my partner is. And these are all the negative projections that will happen after. Yes, after the positive projections will fall off. Then what we so idealized in them will become the opposite extreme. And they'll be overdoing it because we refuse to do it. That's why. That's why they're overdoing it for us, so we have to learn to be that part. For instance, with Mars, if you continually attract Martian people who are independent, who are selfish, who look like they are self-centered, well, then you need to learn to do some of that. And if your ideals are that you have to be nice all the time, sorry, but that isn't going to work. We have to be willing to stand up for ourselves, take action in our own interest when it's necessary, and come into balance with that person. So whatever, and these may sound like simplistic descriptions of the planets and the archetypes, but trust me, these are deep and these are so hard to see that it actually takes time to reflect on what this person is there for. What are they reflecting to me? Where am I out of balance? So learning about yourself through your astrological chart so that you can make the conscious effort to be this part of you and learn to meet people, but only halfway. And that is the dance called Libra. And we are now in the age of Aquarius. We are all uniquely individual. No two people have the same chart unless they were born 200, there will not be the exact same chart for 250 years. That's the truth. These books, they're called ephemerides. They tell you where the planets are to the minute that day. And every single day is completely different. So that's how we are. We are unique like snowflakes. No two people have the exact same charts. So learning about yourself and learning about your own astrology and then sharing it with that person and then being open to them sharing their astrology with you. I really see astrology as being very informational and exceptionally helpful in the age of Aquarius as we learn how to do relationships different because we're not in the age of Pisces anymore. And the age of Pisces, the key theme was sacrifice. It was. We saw our parents sacrificing their own needs in order to keep peace. We saw them as role models that kept themselves hidden from each other in order to keep the relationship going. And they suffered, and we knew that. Our children know when we're suffering. We're modeling for them that it's okay to not say anything when we're upset, but they can feel it. It's in the air. It's in the unconscious of everyone in the room. So this is not going to work out so well anymore. You want to be with someone who accepts you for who you are. And in that acceptance, you both get to keep growing in your awareness of your deepest self. So relationships become a spiritual and psychological sacred task for both people. And we don't want to be separate from who we actually are. Jung says to be divided from ourself is actually a neurosis. Neurosis is to be separate from who we actually are, who we came here to be. So wholeness is what we are each striving for. And it is an intra-psychic experience and process. So we need each other. We need each other to see the mirror of our hidden selves. And no one knows their whole self. I don't care how many degrees you have. I don't care if you're a psychologist with a master's. It's amazing how this goes on over and over, and more and more and more is revealed through other people. As we see patterns, as we see repetitive situations in our lives, we learn more about ourselves. And eventually, we have to give each other the freedom to be our real self. That's what the Aquarian age goal is, to become each other's best friend. Friends don't expect you to be exactly like them. They don't. They want you to be real and they want you to be themselves. And yes, we enjoy each other as friends when we have things in common to share with them, when we, can talk to each other about what's really going on. That way we are completely vulnerable with our friends. Well, we need to learn how to do that with our partners too, because in vulnerability is where we actually learn and grow from each other. So as the Gospel of St. Thomas says, the part of all of us, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. So these split off parts of us can become united when we are working on ourselves together consciously. And this is the jewel. This is the pearl of great price. This is the wholeness that we all seek. So, take the risk of vulnerability and authenticity. Vulnerability is telling each other the truth. And if we can't do this, we will never achieve the sacred marriage to ourselves. The connucho is what the alchemists called it. The sacred marriage of the masculine and the feminine, the king and queen, the sun and the moon. All of these are symbols of this sacred marriage that is taking place inside of us. So as Leanne Womack says in the song, when you get the choice to sit it out or dance, I hope you'll dance.